It will now. Hello. Test, test. Hello. Greetings, everyone. Hi, I'm going to wait for John in the back to give me the green. That's the green. Welcome. Thank you all so much for coming this evening. My name is Andrew Hannes. I'm the director of the Illuminating Discovery Hub here at the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery. It is a mouthful, but I'm here to moderate and facilitate the conversation that is the Crossroads of Ideas, Living and Learning with Animals. Today's event marks this year's second installment of the Crossroads of Ideas, a program series presented by the Illuminating Discovery Hub. And it's developed actually over 13 years. She's walked out of the room. It's developed actually over 13 years collaboratively with other UW-Madison partners, stakeholders, and researchers across campus. So the Crossroads of Ideas brings together campus experts and community members to explore thought-provoking ideas and topics at the intersection of science, society, and the arts. Since its launch in 2014, see, I got ahead of my talking points there, 2014, the series has been a cornerstone of public programming at the Discovery Building, fostering dialogue, curiosity, and connection across these disciplines. We're delighted to have you all here for this conversation tonight. Before I say more about this evening's event, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we occupy here at the Discovery Building. The Wisconsin Institute for Discovery at the UW-Madison acknowledges that it occupies ancestral lands of the Ho-Chunk Nation, known as Dejope, which means four lakes. The Ho-Chunk have stewarded this land and its waterways, Mendota, Monona, Wabasha, and Kegonsa, since time immemorial, maintaining deep cultural, economic, and spiritual ties. We honor their sovereignty and the shared strength of standing together with all First Nations of Wisconsin. So tonight, we're here to explore a very dynamic relationship between humans, that'd be us, little bipedal individuals here in these seats, and animals, both wild and domestic. To help us, we have two amazing scientists here tonight, Dr. David Drake and Dr. Mindy Waite, and we're going to hear more from them in just a moment about their research. And at the end of this conversation, we're going to have a little audience Q&A. So save your questions. And just to kind of give you an idea, I'm here. I'm not only the director of the Illuminating Discovery Hub, but this is also a passionate topic for me. I was a military working dog handler in the Air Force. I had an amazing little pup who, the dog face is up. You've seen a Belgian Malinois before, perhaps. I had an amazing pup for 14 years, and he just passed away this past year. And so, canines have been very near and dear to my heart from a career standpoint, but also personal and professional development. I took more away from that relationship and that bonding experience than I ever thought I would have. So I've been giving back in other ways, and I'm excited to hear and learn from these two individuals tonight. Starting with Dr. David Drake, who is a professor and extension wildlife specialist in the Department of Forest and Wildlife Ecology at UW-Madison. His research and extension programs primarily focus on wildlife and wildlife damage management in human-dominated landscapes. David received his PhD in forestry from North Carolina State University, a master's degree in wildlife and fisheries sciences from Texas A&M, and a bachelor's degree in biology from Macalester College. I'm not sure where that is, but I'd like to learn later. Dr. Mindy Waite is a clinical assistant professor in the animal behavior program at Carroll University and an instructor in Virginia Tech's Applied Animal Behavior and Welfare program. She is a board-certified applied animal behaviorist, and she researches companion canine behavior with a focus on practical, owner-friendly training and behavior modification methods. Her work has earned multiple awards, including and I may pronounce this incorrectly, the Marian? Oh, it was good enough. The Marian Braylon Bailey, and she'll come up and correct me in a bit, and Fear-Free Awards. Mindy holds degrees from UW-Madison, the University of Michigan, and Marquette University, and lives in Waunakee, Wisconsin. So with that, I would like to bring Dr. David Drake up to the stage. Your clicker is right here should you need it.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? All right, good. Well, thank you so much for inviting me here this evening. Thank you all for sharing your time tonight. And this was idea for tonight's panel discussion and symposium was Mindy's idea. So Mindy, thank you for the brainchild of this today. So I'm going to start off our conversation this evening talking about human-wildlife relationships. And I'm going to begin with this picture that I use quite often in a lot of my presentations. I focus a lot on urban wildlife and how animals navigate these landscapes that we're also living in. And I like this picture for a number of reasons. Number one, a friend of mine who's a professional photographer, Jamie Heimbach, who is a wildlife photographer, she took this picture. I believe it's in San Francisco. But what I like about this picture so much is that this gentleman is just standing on the side or in the corner of the road with his arms behind his back, nonchalantly, not having a worry in the world, as this coyote walks right in front and apparently probably within a foot or two of the gentleman, and the coyote doesn't have a care in the world. Doesn't seem to notice that the gentleman's there. The gentleman doesn't seem to notice that the coyote is there. And I promise you this is not AI generated and it's not Photoshop. This is a real picture. And what is really interesting to me about it is that both of them can coexist in the same space and same time, and they're fine doing so. And that's the context that I want to begin the talk this evening about, is how we share spaces with other species where we're in the same space and the same time as other species. So I'm going to ask you some questions as I talk tonight, not to let you off the hook. But before I advance to the next slide, does anybody know how many people live in the world right now? And right now, the longer you take, the more people right now. How about now? I'll give you a $10 million or 10 million person buffer either way. 11 billion. And I wish I was an auctioneer. I could go 11 billion, 11 billion, 11 billion. We're a little high, but not too far. 8 billion. So 8.2 billion people live in the world right now. And then of those 8.2, currently, what percentage of that population lives in an urban landscape? 80%? Okay. Anybody want to argue higher or lower? 70? Okay, that's kind of like the Price is Right. I'm going to go $1 above on the prize package. So that doesn't really count. Okay, so 8.2 billion people in the world. About 50% of the people live in an urbanized landscape right now. And by 2050, the projection is 70% of the world's population is going to live in an urban landscape. So that's pretty remarkable. And I'll talk more about that in just a few more minutes. All right, next question. How many people live in the United States right now? And right now, again, the longer you take, the more people there are. So how many people live in the United States right now? 400 people. I've got 400 people, which is a little low. 400 million. All right. Yeah, about 348 million, something like that. Okay, so exactly. It keeps going up the longer you take. So I want to draw your attention to that top slide right there in just a second. But I also want to draw your attention to we're about right here or so right now, so about 350-ish million people. By the end of the century, about 440 million people are going to be living in the United States, which is pretty remarkable. Of that population that we are currently of 348 million, how many people, what percentage, lives in an urbanized landscape? And we're focused in the United States. 60%, all right? 85% of the United States lives in an urbanized landscape right now, which is pretty remarkable. So we are jamming a lot of people into small areas. Now, that slide in the upper left-hand picture, or the picture in the upper left-hand picture, all of those concentrations of reddish or orangish blobs, those are the urban concentrations of people in the United States. So if we were to take the entire land base of the 48 contiguous United States, so skipping Alaska and skipping Hawaii right now, what percentage of the overall land base would be considered urban? 5%. So depending on the source you want to believe, it's either 5 to 10% of the United States land base is considered urban. So the point of this is we're jamming 350 million people into about 5 to 10% of the land base in the United States. So we are concentrating a lot of humans in a relatively small bounded area. So that's the human side of the equation. The wildlife side of the equation, and I'm going to focus on wildlife in urban areas because that's where we interact with wildlife primarily right now. It's not like previous generations where we leave where we live and we move, or we go out to the country to go hike. Darcy went hiking today, or we go to the country to hunt. Where we live is where we recreate. We don't typically leave the confines of where we live. So the primary vast majority of those interactions that we have with wildlife are where we live, okay? So some of these species, and most of the species that we're interacting with primarily, are mammals and birds, okay? Some of the species won't surprise you, but the upper left-hand picture is deer. We've got red fox up there, raccoons, sandhill cranes are becoming more of an urban adapted species nowadays. Crows, turkeys here, Canada geese, but there are some species that might surprise you that are living in urban landscapes with human beings. One of those being mountain lions or cougars, wherever you live in the United States is what you would call that animal. This is probably the most famous mountain lion in the United States, or used to be. It was P22, but this mountain lion was taken a picture with the Hollywood sign behind it. So this is in Los Angeles. But mountain lions live within the city limits of Los Angeles, San Francisco, and things like that. And considering how many people live in Los Angeles, the second largest city in the United States in terms of human population, and you also have mountain lions living amongst that population, and you don't hear all that often about mountain lions attacking people or eating people, is proof that we can actually coexist with these animals in these very urbanized landscapes. We don't have to deal with this, maybe thankfully, not thankfully, I'm not sure what your perspective is, but this right here, this picture right here, let's see if I've got the, I don't know if I've got the, okay, I don't know if that works, but the picture right here, the middle picture on the right, there you go, that's an alligator. So alligators are in urbanized landscapes. If you go down to Florida, you'll see alligators quite commonly in urban areas. And then this picture in the lower right-hand picture is of a rattlesnake, but it's very common, people in Phoenix, for example, Tucson, Arizona, that they have rattlesnakes in their yards, Southern California, San Diego as well. So these are the cast of characters that we have where we are trying to put all of these animals into the same bounded landscape that we've got all these people. And just like in cities, we have high densities of human beings. In cities, we also have high densities of populations of individual species. So for example, we have more deer in urban areas than we do in rural areas, simply because there's more resources to support a higher population of deer. So the fact of all of this is we're trying to jam a lot of people and a lot of wildlife into urban areas. Anybody know what city this is? And this is in the United States, so I'll narrow it down to one of the 50 states, but anybody know what city this is? Anybody a big fan of the Falcons or the Braves or the Hawks? Is that Atlanta? Yeah, so this is Atlanta, Georgia. And so typically what happens when urban planners plan and develop cities, that they plan and develop cities in a way to house all of us, and then they also plan and develop cities in a way to figure out how can we move all these humans across the landscape as fast as we possibly can, from our residential areas to work, church, shopping, whatever the case might be. And then, after the fact, let's put some green space in there because people are going to want green space to recreate, to meditate, to enjoy, and things like that. And so what you see typically in urban areas, especially in the United States, is that you've got these pockets or these dots of green space, but the dots of green space, because they're retrofitted after the fact, green space typically is located where it's affordable and where it's accessible. And that is not necessarily the best way that you would necessarily locate green space in a city if you were doing that with nature or wildlife first and foremost in mind, just like you would with human beings. And so a lot of times in green space areas, in urban areas, those green spaces are fragmented, so they're not connected, and they're of all sorts of different sizes, and the composition of those green spaces isn't always necessarily friendly to wildlife. You don't have native vegetation there. A lot of times you have mowed turf with athletic fields, playground structures, things of that nature, okay? Wildlife don't have any trouble at all navigating and living in these cities, be it Atlanta or Washington, D.C., or San Francisco or Chicago, wherever the case is. We've got more wildlife in these cities than we know what to do with, and then we know how to manage those species of wildlife. But there's some pretty significant consequences that can occur when you have direct and or indirect interactions between people and wildlife. And one of those is this idea about One Health. And so One Health is this concept where you have interconnectedness between domestic and wild animals and human beings and environmental health. And so the idea is that you want medical doctors collaborating with veterinary medical doctors, or animal doctors, collaborating with ecologists and planners so that you're planning a healthy ecosystem where all these different parts are coming together and being connected. And so one of the most significant and severe direct effects, and sometimes indirect effects, between wildlife and humans is zoonotic diseases. And so zoonotic diseases are those diseases that can jump species lines. They can go from an animal to a human being. And so there was a paper done in 2008, published in Nature by Jones et al. And even though it's a dated paper, it's still very relevant to today. And one of the things that they found, and the paper was called, I think it was Global Trends in Emerging Infectious Diseases. And one of the things they found is that 60% of emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic. So 60% of those diseases are zoonotic. That means they can jump from animals to human beings. And 72% of those diseases originate in wildlife. And so when you've got wildlife and human beings in close contact, you've got this ability where disease can jump from animal to human beings. And so rabies is an example of zoonotic diseases, Ebola, West Nile virus, Zika virus, and then obviously the one that was most significant to all of us was a coronavirus. So before we had COVID-19, we had SARS and we had MERS, which are all in the coronavirus family. So that's a significant consequence of having human beings and wildlife interacting with each other. And obviously, the thought with coronavirus is it originated from monkeys in a market where humans and animals were together, but that's not always the case. And so I'm going to talk about some of the things that we might do in order to mitigate some of those consequences and to promote positive coexistence between humans and wildlife. And I'm going to start at the macro level and kind of work down to the micro level. And I apologize. I know this looks like a second grader's art project. That's because my artistic skills are of the second grade level or less. But we're going to use the same example here of Atlanta, Georgia. And one of the things that we might think about doing from a urban ecology standpoint, working with urban planners, and this is not done often, unfortunately, but one thing we might do is to figure out how to, if you were to plan and develop a city with both humans and nature first and foremost in mind, you might develop that city completely different. And so, for example, we still may have all this impervious surface in these buildings and the concentration of human beings and things like that. But we also might then plan green spaces in rings or in connected ways where animals can move across that city, and there's a buffer between human beings and the wildlife. The wildlife are still going to come into our areas where we are also occupying or inhabiting the area because we're offering a lot of food and water and shelter and other things to wildlife, but we might be able to reduce the amount of exposure directly to wildlife from wildlife to humans if we were to develop cities in a way that we actually were spreading green space out in a connected nature across that city. And so there are some examples of this in the United States. Boston, Massachusetts does this. Cleveland, Ohio's got an awesome, they call it the Emerald Ring around the city. Minneapolis has got a really nice green space that's relatively connected. But for the most part, cities are not developed like this. And that has, again, real consequences. The other thing we could do from a more local standpoint, and again, you can think globally, act locally, is that there's this idea about human-nature connectedness, and this idea that humans psychologically need to feel an affiliation with nature and be connected and be a part of nature. So that's one idea, human-nature connectedness. However, Richard Louv wrote a book, I think in 2008 or 10 or 12 or whatever it was, that was called No Child Left Behind, or No Child Left Outside. And he was documenting the nature deficit disorder, where especially young people, but this is extending to people of all ages, that we don't have a connection to the outdoor world any longer. And anybody want to take a guess about children between 8 and 18 years old? On average, how many hours of screen time those people between that age group has a day? 8, it's 7.5 hours on average. So 7.5 hours a day, people are tied to their screens, either engagement with the screen, reading something on the screen, watching something on the screen, whatever the case is. But we've lost that connection to the outdoor world. We don't go outside like previous generations have. So one thing to do is to get the kids outside, and if to get the kids outside, they'll get the parents outside. Or you can work with the parents to get the kids outside, however you want to do it. But by being outside, all of a sudden now, we have a connection to nature. We understand our ecological footprint, where we live, and how what we're doing has an impact on other things around us that are living there. We may not be so surprised anymore if we're outside more regularly to see a coyote walking down the street, for example. We may not be fearful of nature. We've got a biology course here, BioCore. It's out at the Lakeshore Nature Preserve, and they take first-year students out to the nature preserve. And the first lab they have, they spend the majority of the time talking to students that it's safe to be out here. Ticks aren't going to hurt you. Spiders aren't going to hurt you. Here's how to identify poison ivy and poison oak so you can avoid those things. But kids are not outside the way they used to be. So if you get kids outside, they get comfortable in the outdoors, they start understanding what's normal. And if you see animals, you start understanding, well, that's normal behavior of that animal. I don't have to be so concerned about that animal. But if you're not outside, and the first time you go outside and you see something, you're like, well, I'm not sure if this is right or not. And especially if the animal starts moving towards you, then that opens up a whole nother level of anxiety and concern as well. And the last thing I'll end with before I invite Mindy up here is the micro level, or what you can do on a personal level. And so not only understanding the natural world around you, but also understanding what's normal and not normal. And when something's not normal, that you have the tools available to you to take control of that situation so that you can make sure you're safe and your dogs are safe or your kids are safe or whatever the case might be. And I'll just use this example. I've got a project here that we've been conducting since 2014 where we live trap and radio collar coyotes and red fox in the city of Madison. And one of the things that we have gotten a lot of information feedback from the public about is coyotes, and they're concerned about coyotes attacking especially domestic dogs, but also attacking human beings. And thankfully, we've not had a coyote attack that I'm aware of in Wisconsin in the history of people on the landscape along with coyotes. But we worked with the Public Health Department for Dane County and Madison to come up with a short video on how to haze a coyote. And the idea is that you want to reinstill fear of humans in animals, and if you reinstill fear of humans in animals, when those animals see us, they're going to move away from us rather than move toward us. And that's a way to mitigate some of these concerns that we might have when we're trying to promote a positive human-wildlife coexistence. So with that, I will stop, and I appreciate your attention to this. Thank you for playing along with all the guessing games, and I will invite Mindy up.
All right, can you all hear me okay? Beautiful. Lovely. So I'm going to talk about something a little bit different. Instead of instilling fear in animals, I'm going to talk about de-instilling fear in our dogs, reducing fear in our dogs. And so I know David very kindly talked about how we operate with and integrate with wildlife. Instead, I'm going to talk about companion dogs and how we operate with those and how we hopefully set up our environments to support the welfare of our dogs, ourselves, our families, and our communities. And so the overview for today is pretty simple because we have a pretty short time on our hands. We're going to start by talking about what makes good welfare for dogs, And then we're going to talk about what our dogs actually get from us, typically in the United States. And then I'm hoping that we can end with some golden nuggets of truth about how we can either better set ourselves up for success or work with our dogs to set them up for success when we need things from them. And so when we're thinking about the welfare of our dogs, we can look at it from like a species level, right? There are certain types of needs that dogs might have or other animals in our homes might have. Basic things like water and sleep and food, the ability to bathroom, which I realize sounds like it might be weird on this list, but we will come back to talking about that later. Access to appropriate social engagement, whether that's with us or with other similar species or heterospecifics. And also the general topics of avoidance of bad things, so safety, as well as like having great things in their lives. All of those are pretty important welfare needs of ourselves and our animals. Companion dogs, however, are not just any animal. They are a particular animal that has been in our homes for many thousands of years at this point, and we have very much bred them for particular activities with ourselves. And so they are genetically prepared to need certain things in their environment to have high levels of welfare. First of all, they have been bred to be diurnal, which means that they are active during the day because they engage with us quite a bit. We did that on purpose. They also, compared to other species, and hopefully to a lot of the species, compared to a lot of the species that David was talking about, are very human social. The majority of dogs fit into that category. And not only do they have high human sociability, but they also need a lot of social engagement from us to have high levels of welfare. They're also neotenous, which means that even when they become adults, they are still sort of young and puppy-like, which is very unique from a lot of other canids, which means that from a welfare perspective, they need a lot more engagement and play and puppy-like things than a typical wild canid would. And they are genetically prepared to like and dislike certain things that are going to be very different from their wild counterparts, right? So for example, I have a colleague who does research in companion dogs, and she found that when you compare 3 different types of reinforcers, food versus petting versus praise from owners, dogs strongly preferred and responded best to food. They did, however, some dogs also liked petting and praise, just not as much. I get that. I'm in that camp as well. But if you were to try to pet or praise, a coyote, they're probably not going to be real happy about that. Probably doesn't function as a reinforcer. And so our dogs are genetically unique and need things in this category as a result of the breeding that we have done to them. And of course, I will point out, for those of you who are like, yes, genetics, I know. There's more to it. You're right. There's also a learning and environmental history component as well, which I'm not going to touch on today. The other really cool thing about dogs is we can talk about them as a monolith, as like a species, right? About their welfare needs, like as a companion dog. But the reality is, depending on who you talk to, there are something like 360 breeds of dog in the world, and they all look very different and they all act very different. And that's because they are genetically dissimilar in some ways. And the result of that is that they also have, across breeds, unique welfare needs and unique behavioral repertoires, as well as unique physiologies, of course. You've got your Chihuahua and you've got your Great Dane. And so one thing that's really interesting about the different breeds is again, they are genetically prepared to potentially act in different ways or need different things. For example, there was a research study done on German Shepherds versus Cavalier King Charles Spaniels, who are very cute and very sweet, and definitely not German Shepherds. And what the study found was that the socialization window for the German Shepherds was really, really short, meaning that if you have a German Shepherd puppy, you have a very short window of time in which to socialize it with its world, get it used to all of the things it needs to get used to. Whereas with the Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, you have several weeks longer, and that makes perfect sense, right? Because if you have a German Shepherd, usually they've been bred to guard something. You don't want them comfortable with everything. You want them a little sus, right? Whereas with that King Charles Spaniel, you want it to be comfy with the world, greeting everybody, happy about everything, and fearless. There are also going to be different needs for activities based on the breed that you choose. For example, we have this Labrador Retriever up here, and generally, on average, a Labrador Retriever is going to be very reinforced by the ability to engage in retrieving type activities. Whereas my Greyhounds were not so much retrievers, but were very interested in chasing things. The reinforcers and punishers for each breed are going to be very different as well, and that plays into like their likes and dislikes. And so all of this boils down to, yes, we have companion dogs. Yes, they are a species, But we also have all these various breeds, and each breed is going to have its own unique welfare needs. And sometimes I think maybe we don't take that into account. And Andrew, I'm super pumped to hear about your Malinois because that's an especially special case in terms of unique behavioral needs and welfare. And then for those of you who don't know, I won't go into this too much, but even within a breed, there are different lines. And the different lines have different genetics and different needs as well. So I'm learning about golden retrievers now because we're in theory going to get a puppy in February. And there are field lines and there are show lines. And the field lines are genetically dissimilar to the show lines enough that they look very different. And their behaviors and their drives and their welfare needs are very different. These show breeds apparently are going to be very happy to, like, for the most part, retrieve a little bit and sit on your couch and get pet. And the field lines are not going to be happy unless they're able to get out and do things. And so if I can give you a specific example of some unique welfare needs across breeds, these are two dogs that are owned by one of my good friends who's a trainer and behaviorist. Over here on the left, this is, let's see if I can do it. This is Murgy. She's a Chesapeake Bay Retriever, full-blooded. And over here on the right, that's Skiff. And he's a golden retriever. And their welfare needs are very different. They're very different. You can see here's Murgy retrieving a bird from ice-cold Wisconsin water, and she will do that for hours. And Skiff is more than happy to spend his time in your lap, right? And so between these two breeds, they're going to have very different requirements for nutrition. They're going to have very different activity requirements, very different socialization requirements. Murgy's not super dog friendly as a result of her breed. And they're going to have very different needs in terms of like their mental and their physical stimulation. So I've just talked a lot about like what dogs might need depending on the species, the breed, the line, etc. So what does a dog actually get in the US on average? It looks a lot like this. We have to go and make money. So we often leave the house for something like 4 to 10 hours a day, depending on what you have to do. And what that means is these dogs are often left home alone. So there's not a lot of socialization happening during the day when they're home alone. And a lot of these dogs, of course, there's not that much to do, so they sleep a lot. Well, I've told you they're diurnal, which means that they're awake during the day, or they're supposed to be. So they sleep at night with us. We leave them at home during the day, so they sleep a lot during the day as well. Not a lot of social interaction. And the other thing I'll point out, which I think we often don't think about, is that these dogs might be left home alone for 4 to 10 hours, but nobody lets them out unless you have a dog walker or someone to do that, right? And so I don't know about you all. Like most days I can hold my bladder pretty long, but some days there are exceptions. And if I never knew when someone was going to come home and let me out and allow me the opportunity to use the bathroom, I think I'd find that really stressful. And so that's something I actually think about a lot with our dogs, is how little activity they can get, and how much stress they must be under in the circumstances where they're left at home alone for long periods of time. Also, as David was saying, we don't get out a lot, right, depending on where you live. And so a lot of our social interactions with our dog might be like, we're on our screen, we're watching a movie with them, or we're looking at our phone, and it's the relatively rare pup who gets to go out for a walk. And when we do go out for a walk, we might not have the green space to get a really long walk in. So the walks tend to be short. They tend to be at the pace that we walk. Dogs typically actually walk faster than we do. And a lot of times we're on our phone while we're walking. And so there's not a ton of engagement even when we walk these dogs. The other thing I want to point out is not only is our environment potentially not well situated for some breeds of dogs, but in addition, it can be really challenging to communicate with dogs because we're different species. We are set up to communicate in very different ways. And so, for example, these 3 dogs, let's see if I can do this as well. I can't, but it's the middle dog and the 2 dogs here on the left, they're all with children, right? And what's really interesting, yes, thank you. What's really interesting about these dogs, you'll note, is they're all sort of leaning away from the kid a little bit. The 2 dogs at the top are squinting their eyes, and all these dogs have their ears back a little bit. They're very, very, very subtle signals of these dogs saying, I'm uncomfortable with this situation. And you know how I know that nobody heard that? Somebody took this picture, right? The photographer thinks that this is cool, and the parents, I assume, think that it's fine as well. And these dogs are probably fine, but they're uncomfortable, and no one's able to hear the subtle communication signals that they are getting. Similarly, we have, let's see if I can, the one up in the upper right, is licking this woman's face. She looks like she's loving it. And what's really fascinating about that is many people think, oh, that's adorable, I love it, he's showing his love for her. But when we behaviorists see this, what this actually translates to in this dog, we call it kiss to dismiss. It really means I'm uncomfortable and I want you out of my face. But she's not able to hear that from him. And then finally, we've got this dog in the bottom right corner who's got his mouth on someone's hand. And again, some people might think, oh, it's really cute, he's playing with me. What we would translate this to, and I don't know the exact function for this dog, but often dogs will do this when they either want something to go away and they're uncomfortable, or their social needs are not being met and they're asking for the ability to engage. And so what this means is we have these dogs with lots of needs, and at the same time, we don't give them a lot of choice in their environment, and it's really hard for us to hear them, so they don't have a lot of voice in it either. And the issue with this is that when there's this environmental and welfare need mismatch, it can result in a lot of problem behaviors, which is when people will often come to trainers or behaviorists to address some of these, because A, some are obnoxious, and B, some are deadly, in that if you have a dog who has aggression, that might be something that if it's bad enough, you have to euthanize that dog, which is a really unfortunate situation. And so all of these problem behaviors can affect the welfare of the dog, and us and our families, and also our communities. And so it's worth addressing. And so ideally, we want our dogs' needs to match the environment in which we have put them. And so this is where I'm going to hopefully come to maybe two big golden nuggets of truth for us. The first is that I mentioned that dogs might not have a choice because our environment might be what it is, right? Our lives might be what they are, and they might not have a voice at the moment, but there are two things we can do here. The first is that we can try to stack the deck in our favor. Research shows that we tend to pick dogs based on how they look, and not necessarily based on how they behave. And breeders tend to breed based on how they look, and not based on how dogs behave. And so you can stack the deck in your favor to try to get the right dog in your home by ensuring that you're really honest with yourself, or we are really honest with ourselves. What do I want my home to look like? What do I want my day to look like? What do I want my interactions with my dog to look like? Do I want a Belgian Malinois who is going to need 9 hours of exercise and stimulation, or do I want that King Charles Cavalier, right? And so if you pick the right dog for your home, you have a lot more flexibility, and the likelihood of that animal having high welfare in your home is higher. The other thing I advocate for is really learning to hear your dog. I showed you some really, really subtle communication signals. Ears back, mouth closed, leaning away. Those are hard to see because those are, well, I was going to say, you don't see those in humans, but in actuality, once you see them, you can't unsee them, and they actually do happen in humans too. A lot of times there's a very subtle lean when someone is concerned, or like lip licks, or well, I can talk about that later. But you can learn to read dogs. There are lots of great cartoons on the internet that can show you that, or there are lots of really cheap, frankly, classes online that you can take that show you how to read all these subtle signals. The other thing you can do is you can work with a trainer or a behaviorist, and you can train your dog to ask you for things. We worked with a dog who would put his mouth on his owner, which is really impolite, to ask for attention. And we instead trained that dog to pick up a ball, bring it over to the owner, and sit in front of the owner to essentially say, like, hey, play with me. And the owner did, and the dog's welfare improved immediately, and he stopped putting his mouth on the owner. The other thing I will say is that choice is really critical. Let's say you've already got this Malinois in your home, and you've got to retrofit some things a little bit. And even if you don't, even if you have an average dog, offering them choice can improve their welfare and your welfare exponentially. And so, I don't think I moved to that slide, but that's cool. So some things that you can do is you can offer them the choice of like if they want to walk, where they want to walk, what kinds of enrichment activities they want. Do they like certain toys over others? Do they prefer tug over chasing after a ball? I have on here doggy doors because again, I think I would find it very stressful to not be allowed to go to the bathroom when I needed to. So if there's a world where I can advocate for doggy doors safely, I will absolutely do that, so your dogs can do that. Some research that we did back in 2023 is we developed preference assessments that owners themselves can run. And so a preference assessment is where you formally identify what your dog's preferences are. And so what's really interesting, and I really love this graph, is we were testing for owners did measurements of what treats their dogs preferred, and we asked the owners what they thought their dog would prefer to begin with. And for the dog PETA chip here, well, I'll just show you, oh, I know why I'm doing this. Here we go. For PETA chip here, The owner thought that cheese would be the highest preferred item because, like, it's cheese and we live in Wisconsin, right? And the dog gets its kibble every day, so why would the dog prefer that? But what you'll note is that Pita Chip selected kibble almost all the time over his cheese. And so if the owner had gone by their own gut, Pita Chip would not have gotten his preferred items. So some things you can do is you can actually ask your dog what they want by engaging in some of these protocols. The last thing I will talk about, though, is something I'm really passionate about in our research over at Carroll University, which is something called cooperative care. And some of you might have heard of cooperative care before, and some of you might not have. But it's basically where you invite the animal to be a partner with you on the care that you give them. And often that care is something that, like, it's not something they're pumped about. So with cooperative care, we train them to be accepting of certain things that we essentially need to do to them. Brush their teeth, groom their fur, trim their nails, give them injections, etc. And not only do we train them to be more comfortable with that, but they are also an active participant in that they have choice. They have a voice. They can assent or they can dissent to the procedure. And our job is to listen to them and respect them for the choice that they have made. And the beauty of cooperative care is that it's lower stress for everybody. It's lower stress for them, but frankly, it's also lower stress for us because I don't know about you all, but I'm not gonna hold down a 75-pound greyhound to try to make him do anything. I am not gonna win that. And so here is what a protocol would look like if you were gonna do cooperative care for an injection. And this was my boy Stolly. He was very, very good. But he absolutely would have bitten if he had wanted to. And then we reinforce him for that. If he had lifted his head at any point in time, I would have stopped what I was doing. So you train them ways that they can essentially say, no, thank you. Dogs need to get their nails trimmed like every, 2 weeks? A lot of owners struggle with this. A lot of dogs find it very stressful. There are some horrific videos of YouTube of people holding their dogs down. That doesn't need to be that way. We can do cooperative care where if he were to say no, he raises his head, and I think he actually does that later. As long as his head is down, that's his signal to me that he's assenting to the procedure. And of course, he gets reinforcers for that. So there's no punishers here whatsoever. There's no force. And I think he might raise his head right here, and I stop. And then we come right back to it when he's ready. So that's a research project we actually want to do in 2026. And this is a research project that we just finished up. It just actually got accepted for publication, where we trained owners, such as yourselves, to train their dogs to clean their dog's ears. So that Matt tells the dog, rest your chin here, and as long as his head is down, that's him saying yes, and I can go ahead and clean his ear, and he gets a treat for that. And he will come back and do this over and over and over and over for me. And so cooperative care, I think, is a really big thing. I'm really enthusiastic about it. And I will tell you, you can use cooperative care across a whole variety of needs for your animals. Brushing, grooming, harnessing, going into a crate, muzzling like you can see here, injections, blood draws, whatever you can think of, there are ways to ensure that your dog has a choice and a voice, and that can only increase their welfare, and again, increase your welfare as well, because we don't want to be, nobody wants to fight with something that they love, right? Especially something that they love that comes prepared with weapons on it. I'll avoid that, thank you so much. So I just want to thank our funder, which was Fear Free, for a bunch of our research. If you have any questions that you want to shoot at me, I'm over at Carroll University in Waukesha, Wisconsin. And Andrew, I'm pumped to chat more about some of the work that we do together and the questions that the audience has.
All right. Well, we've got, man, what a powerhouse. You two are quite the team. I'm intimidated now. I failed to mention that I also did a background in city planning from Georgia Tech. So Atlanta was the experiment city, and boy, did I learn a lot. And you hit the nail right on the head there. I know we do have limited time, but I wanted to try and get maybe 1 or 2 questions in with you guys and kind of turn to the audience. I'm sure that there are some questions here that we'd like to get to. And thank you for both sharing your research stories. I really appreciate that. And I wanted to kind of start maybe with something a little bit more personal and ask, if there was a specific moment in your research during maybe an observation that really changed the way that you personally related to the animals.
Do you want to go first? I have so many, that's the problem.
I would agree. Yeah, I have many as well. So if you have something that comes to your head immediately, otherwise I can make something up.
Well, so I can tell you, and this is actually a newer one. We're doing a study right now. I have a student who's doing crate training. She's trying to figure out good protocols for owners to train their dogs to go into crates willingly, because often we shove them in there or we put some pressure on them. And we're working with a dog right now who's struggling to go into crates, but the slow successes that he's getting, and frankly, training other people, seeing other people have these successes and the joy in them brings a lot to me. So it's not just actually about the animals. I mean, the animals are great and important and like my top, but helping other people see that they too can do it is really important.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, I think one of the challenges being a dog handler, everybody always asks, well, can you train my dog? And my first comment is, well, I've got to train you first.
That's exactly it.
I think from a wildlife standpoint, again, there's a lot of examples, but one of my favorite examples is the fact that animals, and when I talk about animals, I'm going to talk about wildlife, not domestic animals, is that wildlife, they adapt to living in urbanized landscapes. And many times I've seen animals actually look both ways before they cross the road. And they're very quick to learn that I need to be careful when I cross this spot here if I want to survive to get across the road. And so they're very adaptable and very quick to learn that.
Yeah. Well, has anybody here had any coyote sightings in the last year or two here in Madison? Yeah, I think, I've lived in a lot of different cities, and every city from Cleveland, Ohio, the metropolitan, the metro parks.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've been
Wonderful.
home.
Yeah.
So you'd mentioned that. You'd mentioned some other cities. What do you think Madison is doing well that could be replicated, or what are some of the insights that you've tried to give to the planners here in this region?
I think Madison is very proactive in what they do. I think it's a little bit easier in Madison because it's a mid-sized city, so it is representative of other mid-sized cities, but trying to manage a city like Madison is a whole different ball game than trying to manage a city like New York City or Chicago or Los Angeles. So there is apples and oranges. But one of the things I've really appreciated in Madison here is that Madison Parks has made an effort to convert about 50% of their parks to natural areas. And so they're moving away from those traditional parks where it's mowed turf or athletic fields or playground structures or something of that nature. And examples of that would be Olin Turville. So, I think Olin is more of the traditional park. Turville is the nature park. Owen Park, O-W-E-N, and there's a number of other parks around the area that they're actually trying to promote nature in those parks. And I think people are responding well as well, because people are coming to use those parks to hike or run or cross-country ski in the wintertime. And then they have the opportunity to actually see animals, interact with the animals. And I think people have appreciated the fact that they're doing that. Otherwise, I don't think Madison Parks would continue to promote natural parks in those areas, because they would receive some, I'm assuming, negative feedback from the public instead of the positive feedback that I think that they're getting.
Yeah, it's really, you're trying to change generations of city planning and just the way that we've been conditioned living in these urban centers, and it's probably not an easy thing to ask people to change the layouts and what we're used to. And I guess when we talk about, trying to change the way that we value our coexistence and our companionship with these animals, is there any kind of insights that you have, Mindy, from, perhaps like with your own companion? Is there any insights that you have on creating a stronger bond, so that way when you approach some of these new training techniques, that it can make it a little bit easier for the human?
Yeah. There's lots of ways to make it easier for the human. The first is probably to, if you don't know how to train, find a professional to help you, a good professional. I recommend people who generally call themselves positive reinforcement trainers, because they can, I think, in my opinion, can teach you the most. To me, the biggest thing you can do when working with your animal is try to be proactive, because the training that we do here, it's not done in a day, right? You first need to learn how to do it. And then our research suggested that, with the ear cleaning protocol, depending on what step you were training at, it could take a week or a month. And so if you need something done now, you're kind of in a pickle, and you're going to put a lot of pressure on yourself on that animal. Whereas if you can be really proactive of, here are the behaviors I think I'm going to need across the lifetime of this animal, and then prepare up front, it's going to completely change the relationship, because they will trust that you will always have their back, and you're almost never going to force them unless, medically absolutely necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I appreciate that too. Yeah, one of the I think one of the unique things that you said is, breeders will select for the breeds that we like the physical attributes of. And we might be attracted to one breed more than another, but our household, our lifestyles might not be fit for that breed. And I think that there's definitely some challenges with that. And when you think about really the energy levels of a specific canine, and
A Malinois,
a
perhaps?
Malinois.
Yeah.
We can use. Malinois have become incredibly popular thanks to particular movies out there, and in almost a negative way, I think. There's more Malinois being bred illegally, especially across Europe, and I know there's been a lot of challenges because people had adopted a lot of these Malinois in particular during COVID, and a lot of them, and they're not cheap. They are very expensive canines, and they're ending up in these adoption shelters all over Europe. And unfortunately, because the staff in those facilities can't manage them, they're being put down. And it's really challenging. It's heartbreaking to see that. And so how do you, what advice would you have for a family as they're thinking about, adopting a dog or getting a companion pet for the family? What are some of the insights that you might sort of guide them with as they make that decision?
I mean, it's really hard because, again, we are biologically prepared to love things that are cute, right? And so we are driven by our own genetics to engage in these behaviors and by our society. To me, the biggest thing, like so many things in life, is really analyzing what is true for you. What do you want? If you want to go run 5 miles every day with your Malinois and you want to train them, cool, go get that dog. But honestly, if you actually want to, if you're being honest with yourself and you're like, I'm not going to go walking with this dog, that's fine. No one's going to judge you for it. But then get the Shih Tzu or the I'm not going to say pug, that's a whole other thing. But get the dog that's gonna truly match you. And it sounds so simple, but it first starts with being honest about what you want.
Right. And as we talk also about adapting and environmental conditions, climate change has a real impact on a lot of the wildlife species that we interact with, maybe not every single day, but as you think about urban planning and the continued impact of climate change, do you have any nuggets of wisdom, things that, what are there simple things that we can do, that we can volunteer to help out with, or ways that we can just be informed or share information with community members, neighbors, friends?
Yeah, climate change is a hard one because that's it can seem so overwhelming that you think, well, what can I do on an individual basis? And even if I'm doing all of the right things, I still see the climate warming, and so it can be a very defeating issue. But I think within cities, though, cities are kind of a microclimate to themselves, and typically in urban areas you have higher ambient temperatures because you have the absorption of the solar radiation into the impervious surface, and you've got the reflection off of all of the windows and the glass in the buildings and things like that. And so you typically have higher climate or warmer climates in cities than you typically do outside the city, and that can support species that may normally not be in that area. And so, for example, in Chicago, there are populations of monk parakeets that live year-round in Chicago, and obviously monk parakeets are a subtropical animal. But in the wintertime, and throughout the year, but especially in the wintertime, they build these large stick nests next to these giant electrical transformers. And that stick nest, they live communally, so they can keep each other warm that way. But there's enough heat being given off by that electrical transformer that keeps the monk parakeets warm enough during the winter that they don't actually freeze, and they can survive in a climate much further north than they normally would. And I'll give you another example. It's not necessarily due to urbanization, but is due somewhat to climate change. It's the adaptability of wildlife. I will predict now that probably by 2035, we will have 9 banded armadillos up here in Wisconsin. They are as far north as, I think, southern Illinois right now, and they are native to Mexico. So that is something that you would not normally expect. But we have other species that are well north of their historic native range, and cardinals are one example, northern cardinals, and opossums are another example of that.
Wow, that's fascinating. Well, I mean, I could selfishly ask questions all night, so I should turn to the crowd. Any questions out here? We've got a mic runner. Just raise your hand. Not all at once. Right here in the pink. Mike right behind you there.
How easy would it be to train a cat? Or
Okay.
are they just better suited to humans than...
Okay, so let me tell you some things. I purposely don't train cats because I find them very challenging, but I have a colleague at Marquette who's working on some cat training research projects specifically to trim their nails, so it is being done. And I have a colleague who does, I won't tell you the whole research project because we don't have time, but she's trying to train cats to drink more water because they don't drink enough water and it causes kidney issues as they get older. And the cats are outsmarting the researchers. So,
Really?
yes,
Wow.
she's very frustrated in a very fun way.
Oh my goodness.
So it can be done. It can be done, but it's going to be slower than dogs, I think, because they're wicked smart. So
Some dogs are.
most,
Oh, you're saying cats are
the
wicked
cats,
smart.
Yeah,
Yes,
the cats
yes,
without,
yes. Cool. Oh my goodness. Oh, right here.
A couple years ago, at one of the Canid Project talks, you were talking about how the foxes and the coyotes kind of were living more in harmony in Madison because there was so much food. Is that still true?
Yeah, so we were able to document it in one of the first research studies of our project that coyotes and red fox were able to coexist positively in the same space in the same time. And we were able to do that with some of our radio data showing spatially that these animals were in the same place at the same time. But we were also able to document that through video and still photography where coyotes and sometimes a pack mate, so sometimes it was a single coyote and sometimes it was a pair of coyotes that we also had radio collared. We're coming off of the Lakeshore Nature Preserve pack and we're coming into the Regent neighborhood where a red fox family was denning. And the coyotes were coming over about every other night for about a 3.5 week period. And they were not coming over to harass the red fox or to kill the red fox. They were coming over because the adult red fox were bringing whole rabbits and squirrels back to the den for the kits, and the coyotes were coming over for a free meal. The fox weren't thrilled about it, but they couldn't do anything about it either because the coyotes were larger. And so we have not been able to document since we've been operating this project that we've ever had coyote predation on red fox here in our study area. And so that's very different than what's been typically reported with the relationship between those two species in non-urban areas where coyotes, being the larger of the two species, will competitively exclude red fox to limit competition for limited resources like food and den sites and sometimes space. So we think, well, we know now with further research that there's such an abundance of food on the landscape in urban areas. So you can think about all of the rabbits. And this year, I was fond of saying there's 2 rabbits and 3 squirrels in every yard in Madison because the rabbit population just exploded this year. But think about all of the natural food sources available in terms of rabbits and squirrels and bird nests and things like that on the urban landscape, in addition to all the human-provided food, be either directly or indirectly. It could be trash, or it could be food that you're feeding your pet outside, or it could be your compost bin, for example. So there's a lot of food available in the urban landscape, and because of that, there's no reason that an animal would expend energy to exclude a competitor where you can share this abundant resource rather than having to compete for a limited resource.
So Thanksgiving's coming up. Make sure those food scraps are stored nicely
Yes.
in your trash bins.
Yes, exactly.
In the back there?
Hi, I was just curious if, because you were talking about dog selection by people, so picking the right dog for you, but what do you feel about the Darwin's Ark projects, which really start to say that less than 10% of behavior is genetically mediated? So I'm kind of curious about how we as humans can make that selection because we don't have a lot of information to go on.
So I don't know that much about the Darwin's Ark project. What I would say is that those data could be true, but the genetics lays the groundwork for the repertoire of behaviors that the animal could possibly have. And so if you can set yourself up for success by selecting for a range of repertoire that would be reasonable for your household, I do think that would be ideal. Because if you think of any breed, it's probably going to be something like a bell curve where most of the animals are going to fit, within a certain part of that curve, and some of the animals are going to be off the charts in either direction. If you get a Malinois, on average, I think you probably should expect certain things from that dog that you have you've brought into your home.
And would some of those behaviors be exacerbated if they're not getting the right stimulus,
Oh,
the right
absolutely.
training? I mean, could it make the
Right.
situation worse?
Well, I mean,
or
yeah,
potentially
that's the
better?
interesting part about the breed. So let's say Malinois, for example, it's going to determine generally what needs they have, but it's also going to determine what behaviors they're likely to engage in if those needs are not met, right? And it's also going to determine like the intensity or the problematic part of that. If you've got a Chihuahua whose needs are not being met, like that might not be, I mean, it's not welfare great, it's not ethical, but the problematic behaviors might be less problematic than if you have a Malinois whose needs are not being met, right?
Right. Well, I know we are at time, but we have one more. Okay, one more question in the back. Actually, we have a little question right here in the front. We'll take that too. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for the talk, y'all. I guess this goes both to both of you as behaviorists. Looking at like AI generated videos, either of like wildlife where, you know, people are like, oh, look, it's a small child that walks up to a porcupine and then they get along, or creating unrealistic expectations of pet behaviors as well. Like, oh, wow, my dog is so good. And you've just taken a picture of your dog and then ran it through a video system. How, like some of those seems like direct hazards. Like you're creating, you know, dangerous expectations, but also like, I guess, how do you speak to that as behaviorists and like communicate the, you know, the potential hazards of those kinds of like videos or perceptions?
I don't know how to speak to that. I will say videos on YouTube have always been a danger. Like, I don't know, did you all see the ones where people during COVID were like wrapping saran wrap around their forehead and putting peanut butter here so their dog would lick the peanut butter while they trimmed their nails? So like things have always been horrifying on the internet.
Don't do
This
that.
is nothing new. So to me, it's sort of the same old, same old. I don't know.
I think one of the worst things that happens from a wildlife standpoint are people like Steve Irwin, who obviously has passed away. But you know, there's a lot of videos online now where people are catching venomous snakes and removing venomous snakes, and the way that people are interacting with wildlife is not normal, nor should be promoted. And because it's not fair to the animal, for one thing, but it also people get hurt that way, and then people watch somebody who may be a trained person in handling a wild snake to remove that snake from somebody's yard, for example, and they make it look easy, and they go, oh, well, I can buy a snake hook online, and then I can just go grab the animal by the tail, and I can just put it into a bucket or wherever the case is. And so I think there's a lot of examples of that, or people, you know, feeding elk up in Calgary, or, you know, there's a whole host of things out there that you just are cringeworthy, and it's not good for the wildlife, and it's certainly not good for the humans.
Opportunity to educate those people and also protect the animals in doing so too. One last question right here.
How important are dogs for humans' mental health?
Ooh.
Is this a personal question or is this a scientific question? No. So studies have shown that dogs can be very important for human mental health and physical health. They increase the likelihood that you're going to get out and walk. Studies have shown that if you have a dog in like a medical care facility for people who have had heart attacks, they will walk further while they are under medical care. And studies have also shown that dogs can support the mental health of the people that they're with if it's the right dog in the right space. If it's the wrong dog in the wrong space, that's actually going to tank your mental health pretty solidly, right? Because their welfare is not good and your welfare is not good. But if you've got the right match, they can be really important for that. That's a great question.
And I'll mention, just to tack onto that from a wildlife standpoint, and before I answer the question, I'm just going to say, Mindy, I'm very impressed, because a lot of times when I come to talk to the public about, especially our urban canine project, it is very rare that I don't get that many questions. And the fact that you are here and people's relationship with dogs is a real testament to how popular and how important what you're doing is. And so that's awesome for sure. And then I will just expand that it's also important for people's emotional, mental, and physical health to be around wildlife. And so I think animals, be it domestic or wildlife, are very, very important for us and our quality of life.
Totally agree with that.
Well, wonderful, wonderful. Quite the take-home messages. I have to say thank you both very much for being here tonight. I know I had some remarks that I was supposed to follow up. We have a few more Crossroads coming up, one in December. Check the website, or is it behind me? Hey, check that. There it is. So please, if you haven't had a chance, sign up for the newsletter. You'll get 4 Crossroads every semester, plus a lot of other really unique events, the sound waves, pairing art and sound, art and music, and so many more other activities that we do here at the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery. Thank you, Dr. Drake. Thank you, Dr. Waite. We are so grateful for this, and I think we all have a lot of good take-home messages. And so go home, give your pup some love, pet your cat, maybe try to get them to drink some more water. But just remember, animals are a part of our life as much as we are a part of their lives. And so coexistence is key. Well, thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
You guys are fabulous.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was excellent.